Welcome to Mind Shield. We protect the mind and pursue the truth. Let's get started.
Fear is rarely random. It has structure. It has a sequence. It has logic. This presentation is about understanding the lived architecture of fear inside a targeted individual, not as fantasy, but as a psychological system built from uncertainty, isolation, invisibility, and hypervigilance. When a person believes they are being penetrated by something they cannot see, name, or escape, fear stops being a feeling and becomes an operating environment. What we're looking at here is the way that environment gets built, layer by layer, until it reshapes perception, trust, behavior, and identity itself. It often begins with a rupture, a first anomaly, a strange sound, a pressure sensation, a localized intrusive feeling, or what is perceived as a synthetic voice. The critical shift is not only the event itself, it is the interpretation of the event. Instead of being filed away as ordinary noise or bodily irregularity, it is experienced as external, intentional, and artificial. That is the moment of ontological shock. Reality no longer feels stable. The target is not simply afraid of pain. They are afraid because the boundary between self and world has been breached. When the perceived mechanism cannot be understood, fear expands fast. If the target believes the attack comes from a technology beyond normal civilian comprehension, the immediate deduction is brutal. Whoever is doing this has immense capability. The less understandable the mechanism, the larger the imagined power behind it. This is where proportional terror emerges. A threat that cannot be understood cannot be easily countered. And when physics itself feels out of reach, the mind starts modeling the attacker as state-level, intelligence-linked, or institutionally protected. One of the most destabilizing parts of this experience is portability. If the effects appear to follow the target across environments, at home, in hotels, in cars, on airplanes, then sanctuary collapses. The old map of safety breaks. Doors, distance, neighborhoods, and even entire cities no longer mean what they used to. The target can no longer say, "At least I'm safe here." And when even the bedroom no longer feels secure, the final territory under siege becomes the mind itself. That is not ordinary fear. That is existential exposure. The nervous system is built to react to threats with fight, flight, or freeze. But an invisible adversary creates a terrible loop. There is no body to confront, no clear source to flee, no clean event to process and move beyond. So the threat detection system never powers down. The mind begins scanning everything: neighbors, devices, cars, routers, sounds, subtle patterns, trying to reverse engineer the source of the assault. Over time, that constant vigilance becomes exhaustion. Exhaustion becomes physiological wear. The body pays for the invisibility of the enemy. Once the target accepts that some form of directed energy or neurotechnology may be involved, a wider fear structure begins to unfold. The logic becomes, if they can do this, what else can they do? Can they track biometrics, access devices, predict behavior, manipulate records, weaponize institutions? This is the expanding toolkit of fear. Vulnerability no longer feels narrow, it becomes total. And at the far end of that logic is what we might call social credibility death. The belief that the perpetrators can not only harm the body, but erase the target from society by controlling the narrative around them. At this point, trust begins to fracture. The smartphone might feel like a beacon. The Wi-Fi router might feel compromised. Doctors may seem unable to understand. Police may seem dismissive. Family members may appear naive, manipulated, or even indirectly captured by the system surrounding the target. The individual becomes the center of a collapsing trust network. And when the very institutions meant to provide protection are perceived as ineffective or contaminated, the target begins to feel truly alone. That loneliness is not a side effect. It becomes part of the architecture itself. The human mind hates unfinished maps. When the invisible threat cannot be located directly, it looks for visible anchors. Social interactions, digital anomalies, odd timing, workplace tensions, street encounters, All of these can begin to fuse into a larger explanatory model. The threat moves across layers: sensory, digital, social. This is where invisible signals can become visible conspiracies. Not because the target is foolish, but because the mind is trying to build coherence under pressure. It is trying to make the unseen visible, to turn confusion into pattern, and pattern into survival. Voices represent a special kind of rupture. If a target hears a threat, or what sounds like a loved one's voice, the crisis cuts deeper. Public awareness of AI voice cloning and historical discussions of voice-to-skull technology intensify that uncertainty. The question becomes unbearable. Did I hear something real, or was something inserted? The issue is not merely audio. It is epistemology. It is the breakdown of confidence in one's own sense of perception. Once a person cannot fully trust their own hearing, self-doubt and fear begin feeding each other like gears in the same machine. Disbelief does not dissolve fear. Often, it hardens it. A target reports anomalies. Outsiders respond with stigma, dismissal, or suspicion. The target then feels abandoned, mocked, or pathologized. That intensifies the fear structure, which drives deeper isolation, which makes the target appear even more distressed to others. Around and around it goes, an isolation feedback loop. Without grounding, without trustworthy containment, the architecture of fear becomes more rigid and more severe. Isolation in this model is not just emotional pain. It is a force multiplier for every other element in the system. From the outside, behavior may look erratic, aggressive, obsessive, or paranoid. But from the inside, those same behaviors may be experienced as desperate self-defense. Shielding a wall, logging events, sending frantic messages, watching devices, withdrawing from people. These may not feel irrational to the person living through the threat model. They may feel like the only remaining tools of agency. This is the perception gap. Emotional reactivity under chronic, inescapable perceived threat is a biological consequence. That fact does not prove a mechanism, but it should change how we interpret visible behavior. So what do we do with cases like this? We start with disciplined triage. Not narrative first, metadata first. Build timelines, map physical locations, gather witness accounts, preserve device logs, check environmental variables, acoustics, localized RF, carbon monoxide, conventional cyberstalking, ordinary harassment, ordinary crime. The task is to anchor the experience in investigable details, rather than leap too quickly into either exotic validation or psychiatric dismissal. Good investigation is humble. It tests, it narrows, it looks for repeatability. It asks what can be measured before arguing about what can be believed. This is the divide at the heart of the problem. On one side, established history, real surveillance capabilities, smartphone tracking, Havana syndrome literature, MK Ultra history, patents, and a long record of institutions exploring influence technologies. On the other side, broader allegations of remote neural reading, V2K dialogue, synthetic telepathy, and omnipotent coordinated stalking. And then there is the psychological reality in the middle: trauma, sleep deprivation, isolation, pattern seeking, and profound stress. The challenge is to separate physical data from narrative expansion, so that professionals can help, without either confirming everything or dismissing everything. This brings us to the ethical center. The pain is undeniable. The fear is real. The suffering is real. Even when the mechanism, source, and attribution remain unproven, the human burden does not become less real. Compassion does not require endorsing every theory. It requires recognizing the reality of distress and responding with seriousness, dignity, and care. That is the standard, not mockery, not immediate validation of every claim, not immediate erasure of every claim either. The ethical imperative is simple and hard at once. Treat the suffering as real and investigate with honesty. In the end, uncertainty, invisibility, and isolation can produce one of the most psychologically destabilizing threat environments a human being can endure. That is the architecture of the unseen. The first step toward mitigation is understanding the structure of the fear itself, how it is built, how it expands, how it traps, and how it can be interrupted. Once the logic of fear is decoded, isolation can begin to break down. And when isolation breaks, reality has room to re-enter. That is the path forward. Careful investigation, grounded compassion, disciplined evidence, and the refusal to let invisible terror define the whole human story.